Welcome. Today we have Chris Harris. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Can you kind of introduce yourself a little bit to us?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I always love talking about libraries. So by day, I'm director of the school library system for Genesee Valley BOCES. So we are a state-funded agency in Western New York, just outside of Rochester, New York. I serve 22 small rural school districts with a total student population of about 20,000. So we're
Okay.
about the size of a mid-size, school district in states that don't have school districts by town. So I've been in this position for
Okay.
about 21
Okay.
years, and I also work with the American Library Association as a senior policy fellow.
Yes, and when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you were a classroom teacher first, and tell us a little bit about your connections with education, your background.
Yeah, I started out as a third grade teacher and fourth grade teacher. Then I shifted over to instructional technology. So my first master's was in computer instruction and did that for a few years. And then one day my boss came down to my office and said, "Hey, you love libraries, right?" I said, "Well, yeah, I married a school librarian."
Oh, that's
And she
right.
said,
Yeah.
"Well, come on upstairs. The interview team's ready to interview you." So they needed a
Oh,
new
it's so
school
cool.
library administrator, and being a rural area, we're really struggling to find someone. And so I kind of fell into it and went back for my MLS and my admin degree, and been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. What is your wife, what library type of library does she work in?
Well, after 20 years in school libraries, most of them K-12, because again, we have small districts,
Yeah.
he is now an online math teacher.
Oh,
She
she's
decided
transitioned.
she
Okay.
needed she needed a little break.
Yeah.
K-12 librarianship is difficult. It's
Yeah.
a real
Hmm.
challenge. Elementary principals see that you should have a full schedule like every elementary teacher, but you need open schedule to serve the high school needs. And she was just in a tough situation and said, you know, I need something different. So she became an
Hmm.
online math teacher and leveraging all of those great librarian superpowers of knowing kids and building relationships with kids and bringing it to online learning and algebra and fun
Oh, that's
stuff.
awesome. Well, and I love that you mentioned superpowers. We're going to come back to that in just a second, but my wife and I are celebrating our 32 years, I think, of marriage, and she's a classroom teacher, so we met, in college, taking education classes. So, I just appreciate your perspective because, having your spouse that has a lot in common with especially the library that you guys share. It brings a unique perspective that you have that I really I appreciate. So I can't wait to learn more. Before we dive into the superhero concept, tell us a little bit about your experience getting introduced to AI, especially when you first a little bit about what you mentioned with me before we started.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been around technology for a very long time. I grew up, my parents were both in technology. My father was director of computer center for Milwaukee School of Engineering. My mother, taught there for a while, and then we moved to Pennsylvania. But so she was always in technology as well, taught Linux to FBI agents in West
Okay.
Virginia, things like that. So I grew up with computers. I literally don't remember not having, computers and modems from, when I was two or three, and compact luggables, the old suitcase computer. So I had seen, and I remember seeing Eliza, which was a very early chatbot in the 70s. It's a Rogerian psychology chatbot that was coded to respond to your questions by parsing out keywords and using that to generate questions back to you. It's very obnoxious to play with, and there are examples online, but that was sort of one of the first sort of chatbots that used a rudimentary form of artificial intelligence. And so, I've always been involved in tech, and when ChatGPT kind of burst on the scene, um, I was I was really surprised by the advances. When I talk to librarians and teachers, I say we all know about the chatbots on the websites. They're like, "Hey, can our chatbot help you?" And they never do.
Right. Right.
They just annoy you. They're just meant to placate you enough that you don't call the company and actually cost them money to talk to an agent, but they never really help. And so you think about those scripted predictive chatbots. The generative is so different. One of the very first prompts, actually, I believe it was the first prompt that I gave ChatGPT, was to write a first person narrative about surviving a tornado. Because when you think about, 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine a computer creating, even though it's not really generating, it's mimicking, but I couldn't imagine a computer coming up with emotive language and being able to include that level of emotive language. So I was, you know, instantly struck, the Arthur C. Clarke, any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. It was magical what this
Yeah.
this new generative AI was suddenly able to do. And so then I definitely wanted to dive in and see what's going on behind the scenes, break open the box as much as I could and play around with it.
Mm. Yeah, that it's commonly referred to now as the ChatGPT moment, when 100 million users created their account within, was it the first week, I think it was, or they set the record for the quickest, to reach that many users at once. Well, let's dive into the first topic of superheroes. So, chapter one in my book is about AI superheroes, which are librarians that will kind of have an opportunity to help their communities. I talk a little bit about in my book about artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is a time location. I have it defined in my book as an intelligent agent that can successfully perform any intellectual task that a human can. I mean, there's a lot of debate over how to define AGI, but all the major uh, tech giants are all racing to compete to be the first to claim that they're AGI. And OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, they're in a partnership with Microsoft that is connected to their funding. So once OpenAI is declared that they have reached AGI, that will then influence Microsoft with their contract and everything. So it's a delicate balance, and then especially the way different companies define what AGI is. Um, so I think, and I recently heard someone I listened to too much, watched too much videos about AI, but talking about how it might not be so noticeable. At first, it was like posing to be this big, all of a sudden moment, and we'd all be like, "Oh my gosh, here it is!" And now there's a lot of talk about it's going to gradually happen, and we're going to kind of ease into it a little bit smoother than what maybe we thought originally. What are your thoughts about? I'm sorry, let me connect one more thought to it too. Is once we reach this state of AGI, the need for our community could be enormous. And this chapter of my book is all about how the librarian can be a superhero to help kind of save the day when there's going to be so much possible chaos and changes and upheaval and everything. And so what are your thoughts about all that with AGI in particular?
Yeah, I don't think we need to wait for any kind of AGI moment to address the upheaval and chaos. The upheaval is now.
Right, right.
With the generative AI we have today, there's enough upheaval and chaos. With the stuff that Google recently released around VO and their video generation, it is basically indistinguishable. And I've already seen reports of it being used for negative uh, hate and fear mongering, um, and that's going to be incredibly problematic. We missed the boat when social media came out. We
Hmm.
in schools we stuck our heads in the sand. We pretended it wasn't there. We blocked everything. We never talked about it. We cannot make the same mistake. The time is right now. We cannot wait for some AGI declaration to begin educating the public about AI safety, AI ethics, AI usage, even just what it is and how it works. We
Yes,
need
yep.
to be doing that right now.
Right.
That's kind of one of the missions that I'm on, is to teach not only students and teachers, but also parents and community members. And I think it's absolutely critical. As for AGI, you know, I it's a big word. It's a very loaded term. Uh, let me try and relate it to something else. Um, when virtual reality was coming out and the Oculus and all of those, sort of headset devices were coming out, people were super excited, and this was going to revolutionize education. And it hasn't,
Right.
because when you put them on, you realize it's not. I'm not in the holodeck. We have this vision of what it should be, and it's not there. There's no feedback. There's no haptic feedback. If you've done any of the VR headset stuff, yeah, it can mess with your brain, but as soon as your brain realizes this isn't real, it all falls apart. The illusion shatters, and you can jump off the bridge and fall down, because your brain, once you break the illusion, your brain says none of this is real, none of this matters. Um, so yeah, how does that relate to AGI? You're right. It's going to creep up, and then it's going to kind of be there, but it's not going to be what we expect. I think part of the problem is the general public, and all the hype given to AGI sort of conflates it with this awareness, this agency, this level of emotive capacity within a computer program that simply is not there in terms of
Yeah.
complexity. Direction following is there, absolutely. Direction following is there now. There are all these emerging stories right now about these AI tools that have kind of attempted to resist being shut down. And so Anthropic and ChatGPT have both sort of written some stuff about, yeah, the AI tool didn't want us to turn it off. Well, that's because you told it its first directive was to support the user and solve problems for the user, and it can't do that if it's turned off. That's just a result of performance and reward-based training. You trained the tool to understand that it is supposed to stay on to help users. And so, yes, it will enact programming to resist being turned off. It sees that as a malicious attack. We have, that's what our virus software does. It responds to malicious attacks and attack vectors. And so I think, are we getting towards AGI? Um, there are the sort of the ages of AI: predictive AI, generative AI. Next comes like agentic AI, agent-based AI. And so if this artificial general intelligence, this big AGI term, gets conflated with agentic AI, we're at the very cusp of it. It's starting.
Yeah. Right.
But
Right.
I think it needs to be so much more than that, because there's a huge difference between an agentic AI that can be trained and programmed to replicate or mimic. I always like to use the word mimicry instead of generation. The generative AI is not creating necessarily anything new; it's mimicking what's been done before. If we get to the point that the agentic AI is able to truly create new understandings and finish tasks that have not been done before, come talk to me again.
Yeah.
But if it's simply a case of mimicry, that's just advanced machine learning in action. So
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
I think it's overhyped, and I think we're going to be sadly disappointed with the actuality when the first company declares AGI.
yeah. 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 I think, I mean, to be honest, I don't know what to think because, I've been a fan of Ray Kurzweil for quite a while. I mean, he's been one of the pioneers about AI for decades, and he talks a lot about exponential growth. And um, you know, I just I worry about that concept of exponential growth. And when you multiply like agentic systems is such a huge. I mean, this 2025 is supposed to be the year of agents, and I follow NVIDIA pretty closely too, and some of the progress that they're making with synthetic data and helping, AI systems be able to agentic systems be able to train themselves and improve on synthetic data. It just to me, I mean, there's a lot to be concerned about AI. I'm fascinated with it. I think it's really there's no escaping it, and if it impacts our society as much as it's possible to, I just feel there's going to be a huge need for people to help kind of figure out what it is. That's I think why there's such a big push for AI literacy. And
Yep.
let's kind of transition that into LibraryReady.ai. Can you kind of tell us about what that project is? And it's a big,
Yeah.
cool. It's the heart of why I was excited to chat with you about what is this.
So this was a uh, project from the School Library Systems Association of New York State. So all the different school library system directors across New York State. We received a very generous grant from the Allison Rosen Foundation, publishing foundation arm of the Rosen Publishing Group. And they sort of challenged us to come up with something that would improve uh, librarians in New York State and ideally around the country. And I said, why don't we create an AI curriculum document, a resource of some type? This is a huge topic of the day. It's something where librarians can and should be leading, but we need resources that focus on AI from a library perspective. I think one of the really big things that's different in this document is it doesn't just look at AI as a computer science issue, but instead approaches it at the sort of the interface of the intersection of computer science, information seeking processes and practices, and media literacy. Because there are so many media literacy aspects inherent to AI. AI, hallucinations, the need to verify information, the fact that AI simply lies. Um, you know, Going back to the AGI conversation a little bit, some of the work out of Anthropic of trying to figure out how the black box actually works, how the neural network works. Um, it is so weird. It is way weirder than you
Hmm.
can possibly imagine. And you brought up Ray Kurzweil. I also Stephen Wolfram has done some great stuff, and his book about ChatGPT and sort of the revelation of reading his book very early on to say they don't know how it works,
Mm.
and they still don't. So I was just at a conference recently, a MIT Technology Review conference, and hearing people from the big AI companies say we still do not know how any of this actually works inside of the model, inside of the transformer model, the neural network model. For some reason, it works and it works well, but they don't know how or why. So yeah, there can be exponential growth, but we have to understand at some point what's happening so that we
Right.
can change the model. So we need to talk about all of these things.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
talk about, yeah, the computer science stuff, but also what does this mean for how we retrieve information? I talk a lot about the change from search engines to answer engines. And what does that mean to the end user? Google already has their AI results at the top. Where do those come from?
Hmm.
They seem to be drawn from the first few results, but the first few results may be sponsored.
Right.
And Google has talked about the opportunity for sponsorship of the AI summary. Well, I don't want advertisers buying placement in AI summary. I think that is
Right.
just abhorrent. But it's going to come because nothing's free on the internet.
Mm. What
And so how do we talk about that?
Yeah, and it's what makes it tricky too is it's advancing quickly and it's hard to keep up with, it's not always easy to know if you say something at one point whether it's kind of outdated or not, so becoming literate is the big buzzword lately, how to become AI literate. In the Library Ready project, is that the right word to use? Is it a project,
Yeah,
campaign?
sort of the It's a long ongoing project. The first document was the scope and sequence that
Yeah, yeah.
attempts to really describe knowledge that students need about AI and sort of sequence it into the four grade bands from primary, elementary, middle, and high grades.
Okay. And I looked online to check out the four strands, there's four strands, why AI, how AI works, AI in society, and AI in practice. Is that getting built right now, or is that curriculum already done? And is that meant to be for librarians to use in K-12 or all levels, or what? Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So we have the full scope and sequence document up there that describes uh, learning concepts within topics under each of those four strands that you mentioned. So we have 16 total topics under the strands. And then there is a sort of learning concept, a targeted sort of learning goal for each of the grade bands in each of the topics. We've tried, as you mentioned, stuff changes very rapidly. We've tried to keep it uh, sort of tool agnostic. We don't get into the weeds of the technologies, but instead focus on really the underlying aspects of learning that are going to remain in place no matter how AI changes. We're
Hmm.
going to have to be thinking about these underlying concepts.
Well,
Uh,
and that's a sign of your background with instructional technology. I mean, that's my master's is in educational technology, and um, I mean that's kind of what our role was as librarians for probably 20 years for me in our district in Colorado, which is very progressive. Was like, how do you integrate technology into instruction without? It's not about the tools; it's more about the skills. So a lot of that stuff hasn't changed for I mean, I didn't realize how innovative we were. And as I got more experience with different states and different districts and everything, not that's not common, to be honest. There's a lot of districts that are kind of still stuck in old techniques and old traditions. How do you, can you speak a little bit to that with the project?
yeah, one of our guiding principles has been that we're going to teach about AI, not just with AI. And I see that same mistake being made that jump right to a tool. I
Mm,
see it in a lot of PD where it jumps right to here's how to use AI, here's the tool,
mm,
and AI is never explained. It's never demystified.
mm,
And if you don't take the opportunity to demystify it, adult learning theory is very clear that adult learners need to understand. They need to from the very beginning, they need to have a confidence boost that they feel that they can understand this and then replicate the instruction. And
mm,
if they don't build that confidence from the beginning because we're throwing tools at them, we're throwing technical terms at them, we're throwing all this brain dump at them, they're not going to use AI in instruction, or they're going to teach with AI, but they're never going to really understand it, and thus they're not going to be able to teach students about it. And so I think that's been the real need is how do we start talking about these things? Um, I mean, the scope and sequence doesn't actually have kids use AI until middle school,
mm,
and you'll notice that the how to use AI strand 4 is the AI in practice, being a productive responsible user. That's not strand 1, 2, or 3, that's strand 4.
mm,
We're starting out with sort of the evolution and integration of AI into my life. How do I see AI? Where is it around me in my world, in my life? We talk a little bit about how it works. That's the shortest strand. And we really tried very hard not to get into the weeds.
mm.
And then the biggest strand is sort of AI in society with ethics and other questions, because that's what we really need to be talking about and understanding. Those are the things that are going to help guide our use of AI as it changes and morphs.
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, I don't know. I would guess a lot of people would argue that ki kids at even the youngest level might need to also, I mean, of course, learning about AI, but might need to use it to learn how to use it, start learning how to use it. What's the reasoning or thought behind not having like the younger elementary level students using it, and getting hands-on experience?
Right now, it's a real challenge. If you actually look at the terms of use for most of
Mm,
the major AI products, that they all say 13 and up.
Yeah.
So that really
Yep.
limits you to middle school in terms of actually getting the necessary, data privacy agreements in place for using these tools safely in schools. So there's a real challenge. There are some emerging ones. I I worry because the way that the AI tools are programmed and designed. One of the things that's emerging right now is the concept that we may not need a large language model for every AI interaction. So the large language model, sort of that back end of data comprehensiveness, has like all of the books, all of the knowledge, all of the things, many of which are not age relevant to elementary school or primary school users. So, what if we created a new AI tool that was intended for elementary students? The way that that's being done for the most part right now is through API calls to ChatGPT or Gemini or another product. Well, the API calls can do a lot, and you can do a lot of sort of fine tuning on the end, but you're still referencing into a whole large language model that has a lot of content we simply don't want or need at the
Hmm.
elementary level. What we need to do is develop new tools that are built around small or medium language models that are much more targeted and focused. And so I've sort of been sort of looking at that and thinking about that. We're
Like
actually
custom
investing,
GPTs and
but even the restriction of a custom GPT is it's still hitting that full language model. It's still hitting that language model where it can go off the rails and get into weird stuff. But if you restrict the language model, and so one of the things that we're doing here at Genesee Valley BOCES is we're actually investing in an AI factory. So a big, robust computer. NVIDIA has some nice ones that are, on a
hmm,
year-long waiting list or something. So we're doing a
wow.
really kitted out Mac Studio,
Mm,
which is generally accepted to be, if you kit it out, a really good AI machine to run the AI tools themselves. So we're going to run the AI tools here. And then we're going to do the training, but on a very limited language set, a very limited set of data, so that the AI won't have access to all of the other data that we simply are not going to be calling. So we're going to try and work with some publishers to license content to
mm,
feed into the AI model. And so it's going to be primary and elementary aged content,
mm,
nonfiction content and fiction content that is going to guide the development of output. And then we will have a much more content limited model that will help us ensure that uh, things aren't going to go off the rails, that
hmm.
things aren't going to get weird on us because
Yeah, right.
they get weird.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of I mean, I don't want to mention to any names of tools, but there's a couple po really popular tools um that younger kids and teachers can use that they really have to take extra precautions to make sure that that nothing bad happens. The kids can't get information that's but I forget the term. I wrote about it, but where you're basically testing the model to see if it will say things that it shouldn't, or kind of go beyond what the rules might say that it should do or whatever. And I think there's been a lot of improvement in that. Since in the last couple years. But until there's, like, I just think a lot of people might worry about lawsuits or, the
Yep,
negative impact on
yep.
on kids if that were to happen.
And I'll tell you, I mentioned it before. What happens inside of the transformer model, inside of the AI tool when it's generating stuff, is weirder than you can possibly imagine. Anthropic had an article about how Claude is doing a simple addition problem, and the way that they were able to map the firing within the neural network was just astounding. I mean, just
Mm,
mind-bogglingly weird the way it did it. For librarians, I think we need to be doing this stress testing regularly. I stress test AI tools all the time.
hmm,
Um, and yeah, if you're an information professional, you can get around these sort of guidelines and guardrails relatively easily. which means I know the kids are going to get around them.
Right, right.
Um, in each of the different tools has sort of a different response. ChatGPT's pretty robust usually, but there are still words that you can use. I found a word it didn't want to um, it didn't want to create like dog whistle content if I use that terminology or racist content. But if I use the term make it edgier, all of a sudden it
Hmm.
was more than happy. The need for librarians to engage in stress testing of the AI tools so that we
Yeah.
understand the guidelines and the guardrails and what it takes to get around them. And the different tools behave in different ways. ChatGPT seems to be very robust in terms of the guardrails, but you can find ways around it. I found the using the term edgy, make it edgier,
Hmm.
would you know let it go into very racist content, sort of developing talking points that were very racist. Um, Google Gemini hilariously will, the way we think AI, you put in the prompt and it spits back out output. But in fact, it's going through multiple different models on the back end. So there's a model that sort of says, well, what does this prompt mean? What are we going to do? What are we going to respond? Let's revise the response. Let's output multiple steps. And Google Gemini would start giving me a response that it shouldn't, and then it would
Hmm.
delete it
Right,
and say I'm not allowed to talk about that. And it
right.
was just hilarious because you could see that it was doing it,
Yeah.
and then he realized afterwards that it wasn't supposed to.
Yeah,
And so
that
yeah,
happened. That happened with me with when I was testing live voice back in I think it was November when it first came out, and I think it was Google. They both Google and OpenAI both announced their live voice tools pretty close in time, and I asked it to like I talked with it for a while about a story that I wanted to write, a scary story I wanted to appeal to like an 18-year-old student who didn't like to read, and I wanted it to be scary, like horror, and I said, think like Stephen King, and so it started to tell the story, and I did the same thing. I kind of interrupted it and said, no, make it scarier. You know, AI in general used to, if you questioned it enough or you told it enough, it would change and kind of listen to whatever you wanted it to do. But yeah, it started to, it was a fascinating experiment because it started to say stuff that was really truly scary, and I told it to use foul language and stuff that a 18-year-old might want to do, and it started doing it, and it kept interrupting itself. It would start to say the story and do the things that I wanted it to, and then it would interrupt it itself and say my guidelines won't let me do that, or so it
yeah,
was it was
it's really
like,
funny
oh.
the way it does it.
And
Yeah,
and then I would just say, no, it's okay. Go ahead anyway. And it would start to tell the story again. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So, um,
yeah, and it's funny, but we need to be testing these things.
yeah.
Stress testing like character.ai. Um,
Yeah, I wrote about
Even
that too.
after they sort of said, "Oh no, we cleaned it up. You're not allowed to engage in sexual violence anymore." And I went in and did some things, and yeah, it still is there. It's
Yeah,
not as upfront, but it's still there.
Character AI. I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, it's a popular AI-based websites where there's chatbots that are like specialized in things, and it's I couldn't believe I'd have to look at the numbers, but I was shocked when I saw how popular, how many website visitors each month, like millions, um,
Yeah,
a couple 100 million people, I think, per month, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah.
is how popular it was, and
School
it was.
counselors really need to be looking at this, and we
Mhm,
need to be having conversations, um, because now with the live voice interaction, and now they're coming out with just announced video characters and stuff.
mhm,
It's for students that feel disconnected and
mhm.
alone. This is becoming their companionship, and
Yeah, yeah,
there's potential benefits, but it's the same thing that's been used for a long time around psychology work, that there are benefits, but in a monitored and
yeah, yep,
situation, not
yeah.
just kind of out there free use.
Right,
That's a
right.
little frightening.
That's cool that you say that because I don't mean to keep talking about my book, but it's just I just wrote about that in because I talked about AI addiction and there's and what you just said was is it's so cool that you knew that it that there's it's proven that especially because of like suicidal things there's such a lack of trained professionals and um, AI chatbots can really like help students calm them like prevent themselves from killing themselves and but it has to be done in the right way and um the
Yeah,
concern is there's just so many negative things that can come out of those personalized chatbots, especially with how
it's
popular.
being leveraged by the incel movement online,
Mm.
and it feeds right into that narrative
When you said the
of
incel movement,
incel movement,
can you
involuntary
talk?
celibate. It's
Oh,
sort
okay,
of this based loosely in this, so-called men's rights movement and
okay.
Andrew Tate and all of this stuff. Just rampant misogyny.
Mm.
So there's a lot of posts online about, women exist only to serve men's pleasure, and
Okay.
I mean, just horrific stuff. But the sexual violence in character AI, the whole point is, AI is sycophantic. It does what you tell it to do. It responds how
Yeah.
you tell it to respond. And so when you engage in sexual violence with the AI chatbot, it responds positively to it.
Mm.
And that's just not healthy, realistic, or, in the real world, it would be illegal. A lot of the
Right.
things being discussed, but it's just not healthy or realistic to allow this sort of engagement. But we need to talk about it, and we need to be aware of it so that
Hmm.
we can address it appropriately in schools.
Right. Right. I have a couple more questions and then we can wrap it up here.
Yeah,
But you kind of sparked this whole issue about fear and anger, and resentment about AI and resistance. I posted a question on a Facebook librarian group and a popular one, and it was a simple question, and oh, did I get like some nasty messages. I doubt they were librarians, but there were a couple really nasty messages about how bad AI is and like shame on you for asking this question about it. And then like I think that person's statement had like 50 or 60 likes or hearts or whatever. So it's like, holy cow. So how do you, what are your thoughts about that concern about people just disengaging with it, librarians specifically, because it's so terrible. It can be scary and
yeah.
like it's got, there's legitimate concerns that people might have.
There are legitimate concerns. There's also, the old IBM fear, uncertainty, and doubt FUD. There's been a lot of articles fear mongering.
Hmm.
Um,
Fear mongering, yeah.
a lot of it comes from a lack of understanding. And I think,
Mm,
when we talk about professional learning for librarians, it has to start from demystification and understanding.
mm,
That's sort of my strong focus, is how do I talk to librarians, teachers, and others, parents, students, everybody, about really understanding AI in simple terms that they can get, that they can wrap their heads around, that they can see exactly how it works, that it works through word prediction. There's no, brain behind it. There's no emotion behind it. It doesn't really understand what it's talking about. It's just predicting words, that you're setting the context for the words that it predicts. So if you ask it stuff, it's going to go that direction, that it's going to mimic human writing. We can see the mimicry because we can compare sources and AI output to see the mimicry and how it's predicting and filling in gaps between mimicked sections. If people understand that, they can start to see beyond the uncertainty and the fear. But I understand what you're saying. I was involved in a conversation on the AASL forum on ALA Connect, where a librarian that I greatly respect said, if you're teaching about AI, you're complicit in the copyright violations and data
oh,
theft. And I said, well, you know, AI is out there. If we don't talk about it and teach about it, the kids are still going to use it.
Hmm.
And I actually went and made the relationship to sexual education. I said,
Mm.
if we adopt this abstinence only AI education approach, it's
Hmm.
not going to work. The
Right.
kids are already using AI.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
what we need to do is teach them to use AI safely.
Right.
We tried abstinence only with social media. It did not go well for
Right.
society
Right.
when schools didn't talk about social media.
Hmm.
We have got to talk about this. You can decide how you're going to use with AI, and teach with AI, but you have to teach about AI. This
Hmm.
is a, generational and moving forward defining technology that is going to change so many aspects of how we interact with information, how we seek information, how we process information, how we publish, write information. It's impacting all of that. We are an information society and an information based economy. And this is going to be, probably one of the biggest changes to information practices that we've seen ever.
Right. Right.
We have got to talk about it.
Right.
Um, yeah, I feel
Mm.
very
I
strongly that we can't give in. I see environmental concerns. Yes, there are environmental issues, but they're broader. They're
Yeah.
environmental issues inherent to data centers and all of the internet. They're environmental issues that are so much worse related to cryptocurrency and Bitcoin,
Yeah.
which I'm sorry, that's fake.
Yeah.
That's not money. Ah, if we're
Right.
not going to be screaming in the hills about cryptocurrency and the amount of power it takes for a single transaction to go through Bitcoin, then we shouldn't even consider AI and power
Yeah.
consumption.
Yeah.
But we
Well,
need
I
to
mean,
understand it.
yeah, the bottom line for me too is that our kids and our patrons, our neighbors, our parents, everyone is there's no choice to avoid AI. And
Yeah.
if by like saying that we're going to stop or, ban it, or we're going to just that it's bad without having any kind of goals to learn how to use it and learn what it is, um, to me that's just not realistic. And that's why I think librarians like can have an opportunity to kind of step into the role to help people. That's kind of what we do.
And we really need public libraries more involved in teaching communities. And so
I'm
I've
sorry, could you say
developed
it again? We need
we
what?
need public librarians
Ah, yeah.
involved in teaching
Yep.
communities because
Yeah.
this needs to be, every person, everybody in the country needs to learn about AI and how it's working and how it's going to impact their lives.
Hmm.
It extends from what we should have done around uh, social media, and the issue with social media is the algorithmic nature of uh, recommendations and the algorithmic learning that takes place for building feeds and pushing engagement. Those algorithms, AI is algorithmic. It's the same issue. It's the exact same algorithmic issue that we never addressed the first time around, and we have to address now that the algorithms have only gotten more powerful, more, machine learning based, and more able now to enact changes and implement things because of generative and now agentic
Mm.
coming AI. So we need in school libraries and public libraries and all over, you know, I don't know, is there another government department agency, what is the entity that does education? We used to have like the newsreels and stuff, but you don't get newsreels in front of movies in the theater. I mean, who goes to
Right.
theaters? How do
Right.
how do how do we educate the general populace if not
Right.
through our libraries?
Right.
They are sort of one of the only remaining widespread educational foundations. So I've developed resources that are I've released personally everything that I do under Creative Commons. So I have a set of resources on, a slide deck for community members, a slide deck for students, a slide deck for parents with
How
full
can
presenter notes.
how
And
can people reach that? And how can they reach you as well?
they can reach me. I hate social media. So I'm really bad at it. But email is good, and you can reach me at my email, infomancy@gmail.com.
Okay.
And um, I need to put together a better um, I need to put together a better simple site. So I'll put it together and I'll email it to you. You can have it
Okay.
in like notes
Yeah.
to
Okay.
share out. But let
Yes.
me put together a site um, that just highlights all of that and puts it all there in one simple to get to place site. PlayPlayLearn.com is sort of, consultancy company. So I have a
Yes.
website at PlayPlayLearn.com, but it's been more focused on my games and computational thinking. I'll throw it up on PlayPlayLearn.com. That'll be easy.
Okay.
Make use
Well,
of my existing website. So
and
then
I'll
they can reach me at chris@playplaylearn.com.
okay, last question. This podcast is called For the Love of Libraries, and the question for you is, can you share a story of a librarian in your life that made a difference, had an impact on you?
Oh, it's got to be my wife. We talked about
I
her a little earlier,
I
but
thought I was hoping you were going to say that.
um,
Well, and why?
man,
Can you tell me? Yeah,
yeah,
talk
I
about that a
mean,
little.
so I kind of jumped from the classroom and instructional technology into being the director of the school library system here. I never actually worked in a school library.
Okay.
Um, and, you know, so I learned all the great stuff about being a school librarian from my wife. She's an awesome school librarian. She was always just amazing at it. Um, Building
What makes her what makes her
relationships with
okay?
students.
Talk about that a little.
It's
Yeah.
the secret sauce. Like, she'd be in a school. She for a long time was in a K-12 school with about 450 students, and she knew every one of them, knew their
Mm,
names, knew who was cousins, and you know, knows what's going on in their lives, knows about pets, and it's that relationship opportunity that connects with students. And
yeah.
that's what libraries, that safe space in the library where
Hmm.
everyone's welcome and everyone finds a place. That's so critical.
Yeah.
It's that, warm, demanding of, yeah, you can come to the library and hang out but you've got to do work and you've got to be succeeding as well. And um just she always kept me grounded and she'll call me on stuff if I get too big or too up in the clouds. You're like, that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that perspective. And I'm just, I mean, just librarians that amaze me. I'm amazed at the librarians that I support, every day
Mm,
uh, here in rural schools, and just the amazing stuff that they're doing to continue moving things forward
mm,
around reading and building that love of reading and STEM and maker spaces and technology. And every time, we start talking about something new, they just jump right in.
mm.
And so, they're leading instruction on AI and leading, in their districts. And it's just it's so wonderful to see.